Hey friends, Joe here, and if you like our Boss Better Now podcast, then you should also be getting my twice-a-month Boss Better emails. Every other Monday, I'll send you a simple note with advice, encouragement, and resources to help you boss better. Just text the word Boss Hero to 66866 to get signed up. That's Boss Hero, all one word, to 66866. Or you can visit bossbetternow.com to subscribe. Now let's get to the podcast. Uh-oh, you and a member of your team just had words. Things got tense. What now? Can your relationship be fixed? And could the whole thing have been prevented in the first place? Plus, a listener asks for help with an employee who is doing the minimum with retirement just over the horizon. Let's get after it now on Boss Better Now.
You're listening to Boss Better Now. Please welcome speaker, author, and Gen Xer, Joe Mull.
Well, welcome back to the show that strives to be food for the boss's soul. If you aspire to be a good boss but don't always know how, then you're in the right place. We call people like you boss heroes. That's our term for leaders who care deeply about their people and work every day to create the conditions for them to thrive. And this is your show. Please welcome our co-host, professional coach, Alyssa Mullet. Hello again.
Hiya. I believe I am also in the Xer category. What is do you know offhand, like what is the years of the Gen Xer? Do you know what it's supposed to be? I think I was born in 79.
Yeah, I was born in 77. And so the Gen Xer years are typically thought of as 65 to 80.
Okay. Oh,
some people put it as like 70 to 80. Some people think that the Gen X range is shorter, or like 70 to 82. There's like Millennial Xer, right? There's all these different kind of blurred lines now in terms of some of those perceptions of what it is. But for most of the people who study generational theory, it's 65 to 80.
Excellent. I knew that there was some kind of like subgenres of of it too, and I knew that I was like on the latter end of it. But I feel like I have an old soul, and I've been told that many a time. So I feel like I'm firmly in the behaviors and the attributes of an Xer, so to speak. I remember you did that. I don't even remember what it was called, but it was like a generational workplace understanding how you could function across as a leader across those generational gaps. Do you remember? I don't remember exactly what it was called, but I do remember
when we worked
vividly
together at the big healthcare organization that we were in together. I had a version of that we would do during new hire orientation, where we would kind of talk about understanding generational differences in the workplace to basically say, hey, you're going to encounter people from up to 4 different generations here when you step into the workplace. And before we get caught up in perceptions of, values and differences, and I care about certain things more than you do, what we found is if you take a little bit of time to understand the formative years of the different generations, then you actually better understand how and why they show up the way they do at work. And one of the things that we know about generational differences is the complaints that every generation has about the generation coming in behind them have been the same forever, right? The generation that's coming in behind the millennials now, millennials look at them and say, oh, they're so entitled, and they expect everything to be handed to them, and they don't want to work as hard. And that's the same thing that was said about millennials by us, and that's the same thing that was said about us by baby boomers, and that's the same thing that was said about baby boomers by the traditionalists who were in the workplace before they got there, right? Criticizing youth is like everyone's favorite generational sport.
It's a rite of passage, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's certainly differences in how we show up, and talking about those differences are important, but there's not as many differences as people think they are.
Yeah. My husband and I were just talking about this yesterday about like, gosh, what will it be like for our son's generation? Like, like the formative years, as you mentioned, like those are the attributes that make up that generation. thinking about spending your formative years in a pandemic
Mm-hmm.
and all of the things that he has unknowingly had to sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes knowingly, but mostly, largely unknowingly had to sacrifice. I I wonder what it will be like other than I decided maybe possibly instead of going full, full deposit on the college, fund, that maybe I should just split that up and be like 50% of that fund goes to college, 50% to therapy, because
Right?
for sure, I have messed this up in some form or facet, and he's going to need the therapy.
I was
So
going to
I
say
feel like it's
almost
a
the
investment.
exact same thing. Not that you messed it up, but that we're kind of collectively trying to navigate so many things that we have no idea. Because you talked about the pandemic, and the other thing that I thought about was social media. Because
Yeah.
I was reading an article the other day about how this is really the first time in kind of the transition from being a child to child rearing that the parents are completely ill-equipped to understand what the kids are dealing with, because the speed and the pace at which social media and technology has accelerated just in the last 15 years is beyond any other kind of acceleration that took place in that transition from child to parent before. So typically, parents, when they're, especially younger parents, as they're raising kids, are able to relate to some of the
Yeah.
different kinds of struggles. But now, we didn't have social media when we were kids, or internet, or phones, like devices in our hands. We had completely different boundaries with schooling and friends and social networks. And so between that and the pandemic, you're right. Like the next, we're Gen Xers, then there's millennials, and then there's Gen Z, and then our kids are going to be the hot mess generation. That's what they're going to be called, hot mess, because who knows how this is all going to influence who they become in the workplace. I'm sure that there are some
Yeah.
really smart people studying that already.
I hope so. God, we're going to need all of the information we possibly can going forward.
Well, this was a kind of a perfect little tee up for the conversation that I wanted to have today, because I had this really interesting experience just over the weekend, and it made me think about it being a worthwhile conversation for the podcast. I was at the grocery store doing some shopping, and I walked into an argument between a manager and an employee.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was in the dairy section, if we want to just set the scene. Okay.
Where all drama happens is the
That's
dairy.
right. It was near the yogurt. Okay. There were two, younger employees standing there talking between one of like the dairy cases and like the frozen food the cases that are in the middle of the aisle that they stash things in. And a manager came out of the double saloon doors, right, that lead to the back
Yeah.
area that nobody can get into. And he sees these two guys standing there talking, and it was like nobody else was around. I mean, there were customers everywhere, but for this guy, there was nobody else around. And he walked over to these two guys, and he said, "Come on, guys, don't just stand around talking. There's always something to do." And both these guys were like, kind of slumped their shoulders and kind of parted ways. But the manager was miffed. You could tell he was miffed. This was not the first time he'd had this conversation. And he said something to the effect of, you can always do other things. There's always something else to do. You can go over to this department and do that, or you can go over and do this. And this was also not the first time that this employee had heard this. And for whatever was going on with this employee, it was clear that at this moment, pardon my French, he had no more shits to give.
Yeah.
Because when the manager said, you can go over there, you can go over to I think he said the deli. You can go over to the deli and you can blah, 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 whatever it was he said. And the employee just said, "That's not my department." And that stopped the manager in his tracks. And the manager just kind of turned on this guy and said, "What? No, it's all your department." And the employee turned his back on the manager, went like in the dairy case, he's stocking the yogurt, and he was like, "No, sorry, not my department, not my problem." And it just escalated from there. And the manager was like, "Well, you know what? If you're so exhausted and you're having so much trouble today, just leave, just go, because that's not going to work here." And I literally felt trapped between these two guys with my cart, and it was just awkward all around. But of course, I immediately was thinking through, like, from a leadership perspective, like, oh man, this went bad in 7 different ways. Like we gotta talk about this. So first of all, Alyssa, has this ever happened to you where, like, I feel like for this manager, he probably felt it escalating, but it was like a car going downhill with no brakes, right? It's just you're in it, it's running, there's a crash coming, and you put your hands up and hope that there's no permanent damage. Have you ever been in a moment like that with someone at work?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I will say that luckily, at that time, I had not firmly tapped into my rage as an outlet. And I think that that's probably what saved me and my professional career, looking back. What happened whenever I got, and for lack of a better term, but it's the reality of how it feels in my body, triggered. Okay. Which, by what you're saying here, how you detailed the dialogue, I can definitely see and feel that manager getting triggered
yes.
of the words that were coming out of this guy's mouth, right? When I got triggered previously in the work environment, that anger or that responsiveness either turned into tears or most of the time I just shut down. I got quiet. I did not say anything. I've never had that occur from me to one of my employees, but I've had it happen from my boss to me routinely.
Yeah.
Right. And so being on the receiving end of what that feels like, I just shut down. I did not respond. I did not.
Where your
have
boss
the
got
word.
angry and you could see her or him escalating?
Yeah. And not even that they would, perhaps I triggered them in some way that I was unaware, that a landmine that I should have, not said.
You pushed a button.
Yeah. And they then unleashed in kind how they truly felt about the situation and about me and my actions, and boom, 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 boom. So it became this vortex of like, nobody's going to get out of here. Like there's no way out except for down. Yes. So when you're witnessing this, watching it swirl the bowl of crap, what you're seeing it happen, did you want to go up to them and be like, hey guys, let's do a timeout, I can mediate this for us right now?
Listen, we've got a great podcast that you should listen to. It was one of those moments where I felt badly for both of them, but in the moment, just based on everything that I do for a living and what I believe, the responsibility for it fell on the manager's shoulders in that moment.
Yep.
Let me first say that in most cases, I have no problem with a manager getting angry with an employee and letting them see that their behavior or their actions or their words have made them angry. That is a legitimate consequence at times of the choices or the behavior of a person. Go ahead.
Sorry, we bring our full selves to the workplace, and we are allowed to have the full spectrum of emotions. Absolutely. Right. And not all conflict is bad.
That's right.
Right.
And my caveat to that is, as long as the showing of that emotion doesn't do harm, right? You cannot rob a person of their dignity, right? We can't call people names or like talk down to them in a way that does harm. And so that's the caveat for me. I think that, however, in almost every case, a manager is going to be more successful when they have a controlled response instead of an emotional reaction. So if we check ourselves and we notice that we're in the middle of a moment where we are just letting fly unchecked, we're letting emotions drive what happens next, we have less control. And so there's a greater likelihood that we could do harm. So, I think what a lot of people might be wondering is, okay, Joe, what should that manager have done in that circumstance when that employee made the flippant comment about that's not my problem or that's not my job? I really had no problem with what the manager said. Hold on, excuse me? No, it's all your job. It's all your department. Now, I would have liked the manager to have stepped closer to that person and said that quietly instead of it kind of growing in volume. But as soon as the employee started to escalate, what I would like to have seen is had the manager say, you know what? Let's say his name was Jim. You know what, Jim? You're obviously tired and you're not feeling well. So I think it's best that we stop now and pick this up again when we're both in a better place. And then walk away. Right? You walk away and you give both of those parties a chance to take a breath and to cool down. What do you think?
Yeah, this was what I was thinking whenever I was saying that, I hadn't fully tapped into my rage previously, and that's probably what saved my job. Like now, given my ability to very quickly tap into rage and anger as a response, I think that knowing when you feel that in yourself, where you can move from a controlled response to an emotional reaction, as you delineated, those two, knowing whenever you're encroaching upon the other and giving yourself the gift of time to say, you know what, I don't have to respond. That's the most beautiful thing. You can take a time out, say, you know what? I am at a point in my reaction to your behavior that it's not going to be conducive for us to talk anymore. So I'm going to step away and then we'll come back together at a future date and talk about this.
And that's really hard. We talked on here before about the kind of the two brains that we all are subject to. I mentioned Daniel Kahneman's book about thinking fast and slow, right? That we have one part of our brain, which is systems one thinking, which is emotional reactive. It's kind of that reptilian primal brain. And then there's the more controlled response, second level systems thinking of, I want to have a response and I want to be thoughtful. And in the moment, like system 2 is not kicking in. This is something we need to train ourselves to do. And so I think one of the first things that bosses of all stripes need to understand and sort of tune into is, how do I know when my buttons have been pushed? Finish this sentence. I know I'm flustered when. Like, what do you notice about what's happening with you physically? What do you notice about what's happening with you emotionally? I've actually done this in workshops, and people have said, I feel my face get hot, or my skin gets flushed, or I get a kind of tunnel vision, or I feel tightness in my chest, or I can't think about anything else. Or I get, like you talked about, anger showing up for you as tears. My wife is the same way, right? When she gets angry, it comes out in the same way. She shuts down or she gets weepy, right? She doesn't rage. That's just not who she is. And so we're all wired differently, and we have to tune into what are the signs and symptoms that I have had a button pushed, because I'm not going to be operating at my best in that moment, and I need to know that.
Yeah, I rely a lot on trying to build folks somatic, in the body, noticing during coaching. I think once we teach ourselves to tune in to what our body is telling us about what we feel and where we're about to go or what we're about to say, the more we can hone that skill, the more ability to move from being triggered to being an effective observer of our behavior and our emotions.
Yeah. And let's go back to the conversation between the grocery store manager and the employee, because I think there's a lot of follow-up that needs to occur. And the kind of follow-up is going to depend on the history of this employee's performance. So if I'm the manager, I still may want to get to that insubordination, right? Where I said, well, you could go to a different department, and they're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Like, that's a problem. And if I say, hey, it's all your department, like I do need that person to sort of embrace that kind of all-in thinking if they're going to perform at the highest level. And so what I need to ask myself is, did this person just have a bad day? Right? Is that who they are consistently? Is there a pattern that is how they show up? Because how I respond to that pattern is going to be different than, hey, I've never seen this from this person before.
Yeah.
So if I'm the manager, after cooler heads have had a chance to come into play, I may circle back to that person and just say, hey, man, I don't know about you, but I don't like how that went. And I just want to apologize for my part in it. If you as the manager screwed up, you got to own that completely. And the degree to which you were out of line dictates the mea culpa, right? You may have to say, I was out of line and I don't like how that went. And even if you maybe weren't totally out of line, it was just a little intense, and you need to find a way to start to come back from that. Even if you weren't out of line, saying, hey, I don't like how that went, and I want to own my part in it, is still an olive branch.
I like that phrasing a lot, because for the most part, most of us can rein it in before we get to the screaming part, or we may realize after the fact when we've said something that we had an audience that we didn't know we had an audience, right? But being able to say, I want to own my part in that is really important to putting yourself back as part of that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the next thing is, because you still need to get to the crux of the issue, which was maybe the refusal to go to a different party, or different department, or just the attitude, right? And so I might say something like, so we always talk about, like, start with curiosity, right? Assume good intent. Talk about what you noticed and then ask about it. You say, hey, you had a really strong reaction when I suggested that you maybe go to a different area. What was that about? We're using some of those boss scripts that we've given here on our show. Tell me more about that. And another tactic is to ask for feedback. You say, hey, man, obviously there are going to be times when you're going to need to work in other departments, even when you're feeling like, hey, that's not my job. So can you give me some feedback on the best way to communicate that to you when we're in that situation?
Yeah. Yeah. Another great opportunity.
Yeah.
To make them feel a part, right? Rather than just lording that power over them. You're going to do what I say when I say it. You're going to go to that other department. That's it. Period. End of story. No feedback, nothing.
And we're trying to correct the behavior, not necessarily judge the person. That's a different thing, right? We address the problem, not the person. And here's the other thing I'll say about this, and it goes back to what I said earlier. If this is a pattern, like if this guy's attitude has been this way, and this is, maybe we've done this, right? Maybe he had the not my job, and we did the, hey, sometimes we're going to have to do other things, and we've done everything that we just said, right? You followed the Joe and Alyssa textbook, and you've had that conversation with this guy 2 or 3 times. And then he still shows up in this way, kind of casting off responsibility and getting in your face and being difficult. That's a different conversation entirely, right?
Yeah.
If it's an isolated incident, you respond with caring and humility. If it's repeated incidents, we actually have to set firm boundaries. When both heads are cool, where we say to that person, okay, we have a pattern now, and I want you to be a part of this team, and I care about you, and I care about the work you do here, but this cannot happen again. And we need to have a conversation where you leave here with a crystal clear mutual understanding of what happens next if you engage in XYZ. That's not okay. And bringing a little bit of a firmer tone and more confident tone and a more direct tone to that conversation is appropriate when we have a pattern.
Yeah. Wow. The lessons you learn in the grocery store. What a great story.
Conflict in aisle 9.
Dairy drama.
Dairy drama, that's right. Well, I'd be curious from our listeners, what other kind of challenges they have found when it comes to conflict with employees. If you have a question or a situation you'd like us to weigh in on, you can shoot us an email to bossbetternow@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. You know that our show is shaped by the questions you ask, the stories you tell, and the challenges you face. So let us know how we can be helpful or what topics you'd like us to cover. That email, once again, is bossbetternow@gmail.com. The Camaraderie question of the week, Alyssa, is an opportunity for us to give our listeners a question they can use at meetings to facilitate connection and build camaraderie. We know that bosses build camaraderie on teams by making it easier to find things in common with each other. So that's why we bring a question to our show every week that allows people to give people the chance to find those commonalities together. And so our camaraderie question of the week this week is this: what is the longest you've gone without sleep and why?
April of 2014 to all of, well, probably till January of 2015 at minimum.
Oh, okay.
Sleeping for no more than 2 hours, maybe 3 if you're lucky.
Okay.
And this corresponds to my son's birth. And yes, he was a quote bad sleeper as a newborn, but in addition to that, he also had colic, and what we would later learn at 6 months old was reflux, a severe case of reflux. After he got the baby Zantac or the Prilosec, I don't know, whatever it was, I could sleep for more than 4 hours at a time, and I thought I had been reborn myself.
Yeah. So how long was that time then? You said April to January?
Yeah. Yeah. It was rough.
That's like 9 months. That's brutal.
Yeah. It was very hard. Very hard.
And I know so
cried
many folks,
a lot.
Yeah, I know so many parents listening to this right now are like, I see you, my sister. Like that is a shared experience, I think, for a lot of new parents, and it's hard.
Yeah. I cannot imagine having to have had to go into a workplace and function because I couldn't do it. I would have lost my job and deserved it because I couldn't function very well at all.
I remember Henry had a sleep regression. There was a term for it. That might have been it. It might have been called something else. But at about 4 or 5 months old, and for a period of about 2 to 3 months, he was in these cycles at night where he would sleep for 90 minutes, be up for 90 minutes, sleep for 90 minutes, be up for 90 minutes. And we were like, what is going on? And it just absolutely would grind you down in ways that are hard to explain to other folks. And then when, the pediatrician says, yeah, this could go on for a while or it could not, you just got to ride it out. It's like, and we were lucky that it really was only about a 2-month thing for him. We came out of it after a couple of weeks, thankfully. But it is debilitating.
Yes. Yeah. Sleep's important. So important. So what about you? Was that the time for you?
Nope.
That you got?
Well, I answered this question differently. So the question was, what's the longest you've gone without sleep and why? And I interpreted it as any sleep at all. So what is the most continuous stretch of time that I had to be awake once?
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
And I think this is kind of a fun story. So it was my sophomore year of high school. I was going on a choir trip to New York City. I got to sing at Carnegie Hall in New York City as a high school kid. And the schedule played out like this. We went to school on a Thursday, right, regular school day, came home, ate dinner, packed our bags, got transported back to the school, and got on the bus to ride to New York City at like 9 o'clock at night. Like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And then we drove all night, overnight, on the bus to New York City. It was a bus full of high school kids. Nobody slept. right? Everybody was goofing off and carrying on. And we get into New York City at our hotel like 7 or 8 in the morning, and we had to check in, change our clothes, brush our teeth, and then we were off to rehearsal. So we had this long morning rehearsal because we were participating in an event with several choirs from other states. And so we'd have a rehearsal from like 10 a.m. to noon, and then a break for lunch, and then an afternoon rehearsal from 1 to 4 or something like that. And then back to the hotel, change your clothes, dinner, and then we had tickets to see a Broadway show. And so I got up Thursday morning and went to school and did not sleep at all Thursday or at all Friday. And I remember so clearly, this was in February of, 1992. And I remember sitting in the theater and seeing Les Mis, and that's a night that changed my life. I have a bachelor's degree in music and voice, and that's a significant moment in my life, seeing Les Mis on Broadway and looking around and seeing the 18 people who had gone on the trip, only 3 people were still awake during the show. It was me, a friend of mine named Katie, and our teacher.
Wow.
Everybody else had fallen asleep during the show. But what is that, like 38, 40 hours of being awake? Yeah, that's the longest I ever went without sleep. It was worth it, though.
Worth it.
I should have made that. That was like a little story time right there. I should hit the story time music just to keep us on brand. But that's the longest I've gone without sleep, and why. And that is the camaraderie question of the week. Well, hey, Boss Heroes, are there leaders in your organization struggling to support employees during these challenging times? Do they often not know what to say or do to overcome employee frustration or apathy or disagreement? Well, we might be able to help. At my company, we work with organizations of all sizes to give leaders the skills, tools, and knowledge they need to become better bosses. So no matter your company size or budget, we have options to give the managers on your team the ongoing training, coaching, and support they need to face the challenges of today's workplace. For more information or to learn more about ways we might be able to help, you can set up an introductory call by emailing hello@joemull.com. hello@joemull.com. And with that, we come to the final segment of our show, which is Mail Time! Alyssa, we have a question from Chelsea in Colorado. Here it is. A particular challenge I am experiencing is a not engaged employee teetering towards being actively disengaged. They're just riding it out until retirement. She has been in her role for some time, well before I joined the organization, and previous supervisors have given her raving annual reviews. As time has passed, and as things have changed and challenges persist, it's clear she is content to do the minimum necessary until retirement comes. Any advice on getting to the finish line with someone who appears to already be checked out? Thank you for the question, Chelsea. I am absolutely certain that other people listening to this podcast have been in this situation. Call it senioritis, call it whatever you want, where you have some folks who maybe they're moving on to a new job, maybe they're entering retirement, but they see the light at the end of the tunnel, and suddenly they are not operating at the optimal level. Alyssa, how can we help Chelsea?
So there's a lot of places that I could go with this, and I think I'll try to hit all of them.
Okay, do it.
I like broad strokes. So the first thing is, obviously, there's a lot of subjectiveness to the interpretation of doing the minimum, right?
Sure.
And writing it out, especially in the face of the past performance of reviews that you say that have been,
Raving.
noting an exemplary employee, right? So that's the first thing. Is this individual still meeting the essential functions of the job? Because the other stuff, kind of like that, just not meeting our expectations. Is she not going above and beyond? Because the reality is I don't think in today, 2022, we can really expect people to go beyond routinely. It's just not within everyone's capacity. There are people, and maybe she's one of them, that are struggling to do that minimum. The minimum is a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to be a little bit more holistic in the framing of what constitutes doing the minimum, truly. My next thought is, have you talked to her? Yeah. Have you mentioned that this is what your perception of her work ethic is? And I would also say this is an opportunity not to call her out and use it as a discipline opportunity, but what is the legacy that this employee wants to leave with the organization? That's an opportunity to build on, not to try to cut down this individual further. So speaking to the legacy aspect of it. And then my third and final thing is, if she's meeting the minimum expectations of the job, you've had a conversation, you've tried to inspire, you've tried to give the opportunity. The third thing is, you decide, are you gonna let it go? Mm-hmm. Let it go. Let it, is this really the hill you want to stake your marker in? Mm-hmm. Or is it detrimental enough to the organization and to the team that you do need to make that retirement quicker in the form of discipline and termination? Mm-hmm. So that's the full scale. That's my full spectrum.
Yeah.
What say you? Where do you go within that spectrum?
You and I are very aligned. I know that your point about is the minimum all she has to give at this point is fair. And we just got done in the previous segment talking about starting with curiosity and asking, hey, what's that about? And so, being able to step back and say, maybe it's not senioritis, maybe it's not, I don't care because I'm coasting to retirement, but sitting across from this person and saying, okay, you've consistently been here, even before I got here, that much is obvious. But now I see that you're here. Are you okay? What's that about? What's going on? And maybe what you learn in that moment is that they're struggling with some things that you never would have found out about. Or maybe they are struggling with some things that are none of your damn business and they're not going to share them with you. Maybe they just say, hey, you know what, I've got some things going on and you're right, but this is all I've got to give. And whatever they say next, it's going to shape and inform what you do next as a leader. If they dismiss you entirely, if they don't show any concern about the harm that their performance is causing, because I assume you're having this conversation because there is a harmful component to how they're showing up. Maybe it's damaging morale on the team. Maybe other tasks and duties and responsibilities are having to be picked up and cleaned up by other folks. There are lots of different ways that this could be harmful to the people around this employee. And so the point that Alyssa made about, is this worth making a big deal about is going to be directly related to the degree of harm that is taking place. But I agree, Alyssa. I think we start by appealing to legacy. We appeal to this person's character, and we appeal to the influence that they have. So maybe you have that conversation about what's this about, or maybe you end up having to have a harder conversation that includes feedback about doing the minimum, or how some certain behaviors are creating more work for others or sabotaging morale. But I think there's an opportunity here in that conversation to highlight this person's extensive experience and their years of service, and maybe the outsized role that they have in the eyes of the other people on the team. I like asking sometimes, almost rhetorically, hey, do you have any idea how much influence you have around here? you're the legend. You're the legacy person, man. Like you are the guru and the sage, wily veteran. And so people watch you and they copy you and they mirror you. And for that reason, I need to ask you, with your departure so close, can I count on you to cross the finish line with the same amount of rigor and commitment to the work that we have that you've done here as you have for the last 20 years? And then you can have that conversation about legacy, right? How you are going to be remembered, fair or unfair, is going to be about who you were when you left, not for what came before. That's something that I learned from you, and that I know you are so intentional about working with people on in a coaching relationship, especially people who are about to move on to the next thing, is legacy. And then I agree. If there is harm being done and there is no improvement, then maybe there are some more formal HR processes that need to be kicked in here, and they need to be treated like anyone else, because there's still a minimum standard of performance that does need to be met, right? Like if the job is answering the phone and they're like, yeah, I'm just going to let it ring because I don't care. I mean, it's easy to be like, well, if that's all you can give. No, like the job is answering the phone. So you got to answer the phone. Yeah. And so there may need to be that more corrective action component. But I feel like that's a last resort here, and only if you get no movement in the right direction from the other person.
Agreed. We're so simpatico sometimes. Other times you say things like, no ice. And I have to completely disagree, but...
No ice? What's no ice?
Was it you that had the position? Yeah, you said something about you have like the very strong feelings with ice, and you want ice.
Yes, there needs to be ice in my soda. Yes.
Yeah.
Ice. And you're not. You're tepid.
I am. I'm whatever. I let it go, man. I let it go.
Well, on this, we are aligned. And so, Chelsea, keep in touch. If you take any of our advice and it works or it backfires, we want to hear about how it went and what worked and what didn't. And, that's an education we can all have together. So thanks for the question. Excellent. And if you are listening out there and you have a question as well, send it to us at bossbetternow@gmail.com. In the meantime, that's our show this week, friends. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your listening platform to make sure you get the new episode of our show each week as soon as it's released. And for now, thanks for listening, and we look forward to being with you next time.
This show is sponsored by Joe Mull and Associates. Remember, commitment comes from better bosses. Visit joemull.com today.